Welcome to Biologica. I'm Dr. Susan, a veterinarian and a marine educator from Maine. On this show, we'll be exploring the many ways that animals and humans interact and that society and nature intersect. Please visit my Patreon or my Podbean page to support the show or to suggest future episodes. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode today. Thanks for listening.
Fly in me face, fly in me face, fly in me face, fly in me face. Well, I hope to God we don't come out and fly in me face tonight. Well, I come home from a party and I'm feeling a little spaced, and I walk on in the kitchen and a bat fly in me face. Well, the bat come down the chimney. You see, he wait in the fireplace. When he hear that I'm getting a little snack, the bat fly in me face.
Today's episode of Biologica is going to be about bats, both what we're learning about them from research and a little bit digging into our feelings about bats and what might be unexpected about them. I chose the theme of bats because of the upcoming holiday Halloween and related holidays that are celebrated in many countries around the world. And bats have a symbolic connection to Halloween. Sometimes they're associated with scary things or horror movies. But one of the things we'll do in this episode is actually challenge some of these stereotypes about bats and learn about why they might be sort of sweet or kind. Some of the things we don't always think about when we think of bats. Today we'll learn some interesting facts about bats. We'll talk to a bat researcher who's really learning some very cool stuff about how they navigate and use echolocation and how they can perceive space and how they manage not to hit each other when they come out of their caves all at once. Also, we'll learn about how bats are really important to people, why we should care, and highlight a couple research studies that the biologist we'll talk with was part of. And finally, we'll touch upon a bat poem. I really wanted to find a poem about a cuddly and kind bat, short of just reading from a children's book like the classic beloved book Stella Luna. I really couldn't find many poems that didn't highlight the darker or perceived scary side of bats. So the poem I read does reference that a little bit. If anybody wants to email me a poem that they write or find about the cuddlier side of bats, please do so, and I'd love to share it. I'm also going to go outside at dusk and see if I can spot any bats. When I was going for walks in the evening with my kids, we used to see bats looping overhead right at dusk, and we used to chant, "Go, bats, go, catch the mosquitoes," which we'll touch a little bit on today, how they really benefit humans and people who do farming or gardening in terms of all of the insects that they eat.
Early in the evening as the sun goes down, all the stars begin to light up the sky. Well, there's one little creature that's just waking up. Till the first crack of dawn she will fly. So many stories are told about her. She's the queen of Halloween. But half the stories are told by people she has never seen. Oh, bats, 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 funky little bats. Bats are the critters of the night. Fun-lit butterfly and bulldog bats. Bats know where everything's at. You don't go bump, you know.
For just a few highlights on interesting bat facts before we look at the research on echolocation, we have some facts about bats from a website from the Department of the Interior, 13 facts about bats. I'm actually going to pull out 8 that I wanted to share, and one is that baby bats are called pups, and a group of bats is called a colony. I love thinking of the little baby bat pups and the researcher that we talk with today will refer to the pups and the colonies. So that's helpful to kind of know that terminology right off the bat. Haha, no pun intended. Number 2, there's over 1,400 species of bats worldwide, and they range from what's nicknamed the bumblebee bat, the world's smallest mammal, which according to the website weighs less than a penny, to the flying fox, which has a wingspan of up to 6 feet. Kind of incredible. Fact 3, bats don't have many natural predators. There are a few things like owls, hawks, and snakes that will eat or hunt bats. But most of the challenge facing bats, at least here in North America, is white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that is really decimating certain bat populations or species. Fact 4, each night bats can eat up to their body weight in insects, and this can number insects in the thousands per bat. And so this really helps foresters and farmers and maybe just people who like to hang out outside without getting bitten by a lot of black flies or mosquitoes. We'll talk a little bit more about their importance in the ecology and how they eat the insects later in this episode. They're also really important because of being a pollinator species, which we'll talk more with the researcher about. Fact 5, bats are the only flying mammal. There are some gliding mammals, but they're the only ones that can be true flyers. Their wing resembles a modified human hand, so if you look at your hand and stretch the fingers wide, you can imagine that the skin membrane between your fingers is sort of stretched further out between your fingers. That is what helps make them agile flyers. Fact 6. How fast a bat flies depends on what kind it is, but some of them can reach speeds of over 100 miles an hour. Fact 7. The longest living bat is 41 years old. So many bat species in the wild live less than 20 years, but there have been some species that live longer than 30 years, and in 2006, a tiny bat was documented to have lived 41 years. Kind of incredible. And the final fact, fact 8, bats are very meticulous about grooming themselves, much like cats that you see grooming themselves. Now, I want to just share myself, I'm a lover of domestic or pet rats, and they also are very meticulous groomers. So a lot of small mammals are very careful about grooming their fur. It helps really remove parasites, it helps keep them warm, and so on. Now we're going to go outside and see if we can find any bats hunting for insects in the twilight sky. We just saw a bat fly over. Oh, there it goes. It's doing loops right by our garage and pine trees.
Cool.
Oh, it's doing loops around.
Catching some insects, probably.
Yeah. Do you remember what we used to sing with the girls?
No.
We'd sing, "Go Bats Go, Catch the Mosquitoes."
Oh, I think I do remember that now, when you mention it. We have a little bat house there.
We do.
Right?
We
Yeah.
do
I
have a
wonder
little
if
bat
any
house.
bats live in it.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's there, but I haven't ever, investigated whether it's full. Well, that was cool.
Bats are pretty awesome.
Yeah. In addition to looking for bats, we're going to ask a few people about what they think about or associate with bats. Kyle, what do you think about bats? How do you feel about them?
I think they're very mysterious because I know that they live around where we are, but I never see them except when I look at the sunset sky. Sometimes I see them flitting around.
And it feels kind of mysterious where they live around here, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think that they're scary?
No, I don't think they're scary. I feel like popular culture usually treats them like they're scary, but I'm not really scared of them. I'm not sure why. But they seem like little flying mice or something to me, so they don't seem scary. They seem kind of cute, maybe.
Nice. All right. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
This is my friend Laurel, and she's agreed to have me ask a couple questions about bats. Thanks for being here, Laurel.
You're welcome.
So Laurel, part of what I'm talking about in this episode is how people have sort of different opinions or feelings about bats. What do you think about them, or how do you feel about bats?
I love bats. And my feelings about bats are tied to my feelings about my dad. So I love bats because I love caves, and I love caves because I love my dad. And my dad loves caves and the caving community. So my affinity for bats is also wrapped up in a lot of, love for my dad.
That's really cool. And did your dad introduce you to the world of bats and caves when you were young?
Yes, yeah, he started taking us to caving events when I was in grade school, maybe 8 to 10 years old.
Did you ever feel sort of nervous about bats, or did you just kind of feel positive associations right off the bat? No pun intended.
No, definitely positive ones, because I can't remember any moments where there was like scary bat stuff. So never had bats come into our home or anything like that. It was always just bats associated with this community that my dad loved so much. And then because I think I always found them to be friends and beneficial, I've always seen them kind of in a magical light. So I love how they come out at dusk and they're doing all of their work. I love how they live in colonies. They're a social species like us. And then when the bats were threatened by the white-nosed fungus up in the Northeast, a lot of the scientific community and the caving community mobilized to respond to that and understand it. So I've always had great feelings about bats.
What would you say to people who think of them as creepy or scary?
They're really important to our ecosystem. They're doing the hard work of being out and about. There's bats that are pollinators, there's bats that are eating pests, and they're just out there living their lives. They're not trying to disrupt ours.
Well, thank you so much for chatting about bats, and it's really cool to think of your lifetime of appreciating them and also the connection with your dad. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Hi, said the little leather-winged bat, I'll tell you the reason that I fly in the night is because I lost my heart's delight. Howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, oh-lo-lee-diddly-do.
Now that we've looked for bats and also talked to a few people about their feelings or thoughts about bats, we're going to turn and talk to our research expert. I'm here today with Dr. Aya Goldschtein, a postdoctoral student in the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior at the University of Constance. Welcome, Dr. Goldschtein.
Hey,
Hi, thank you for being here.
thank you for this invitation.
Great. Just to start off, how did you get interested in the beginning in animal behavior? And you've studied bats recently. How did you get interested in bats in particular?
So in general, I always loved animals, and it was not really a question for me what I'm going to study. It was something that was very clear to me, I think from childhood. But I actually started to my academic way studying birds, not bats.
Mm.
And after I finished my master's on birds, I heard about a new researcher in Tel Aviv University that study bats, and I wanted to do my PhD over there. And he had a very nice idea to study the nectar feeding bats in Mexico. And I think these species really caught my attention and my really made me a bat researcher. And I think this is where everything was started for me.
Interesting. Oh, that's great. And I'm wondering, from one of the papers I read of yours, could you tell the listeners today a little bit about the what you called the cocktail party nightmare? What's meant by that and how you went about helping learn about it? I think maybe there were some tiny microphones involved. It was very fascinating. I wondered if you could tell a little bit about what that issue is and how you learned more about it.
Sure. So collective behavior in general is a very wide phenomenon. But when we are looking on collective behavior in bats, there is a specific case where we see thousands to millions of bats emerge from their cave at the same time. And when we are talking about echolocating bats, they all use this active sense, their echolocation, to orientate in space and to manage to solve this scenario where so many bats emerge and fly from their cave at the same time while using this active sense. And what it means that when one individual echolocate, and this is basically his eyes, right? If we compare it to humans.
Echolocation is the process by which an animal emits sounds and then determines where objects are or finds its way by listening to the sounds reflected back to it.
So when one bat echolocates, it can mask the echolocation of another bat. It means that the bats try to echolocate and understand what is going on around it and fly without colliding other individuals, but it can't. It basically emit echolocation call, another bat mask or jam the echolocation and the reflected echo, and then it does not have information. And that can be collision, it can be even fatal. So that's the scenarios that we all know in the bat community, and it's also in many cases you see this kind of phenomena in just movies where you see like it's a very unique phenomena. But if you really stand next to the bats that emerge from the cave, you see that bats can actually solve this problem somehow. Most of them fly without colliding. Some of them do collide, but it's really low percentage. And we always wonder, how do they solve this acoustic problem? And what we used to do before we had these tiny microphones, we used to put a microphone next to the entrance of the cave and just to see the entire acoustic scene. And if you look on these recordings, what you see is that the bats, you see basically a cacophony, and you don't understand how can it be that they can really get the reflected echo. But if you use this new technology and you put a microphone on the back of a bat and you actually can get information that a specific bat's experience when they fly, you actually understand that the situation is not as severe as we used to think. And because this microphone, it's not only record their echolocation and the reflected echo, it's also record their position. So what we did in this situation is to tag tens of bats at the same time, and we saw not only the echolocation, but also the movement. And we see that when the bats emerge from the cave, they immediately increase the distance from one another. And that's not only decrease the chances to collide, but it's also reduce the potential jamming that they experience. It means that they experience less interference, basically.
That's so interesting. I know I've seen, and a lot of people have seen a video footage of bats emerging from a cave, but I'd never thought about, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that that's a big question. How do they do that? And also I didn't know about the acoustic jamming issue. That's really interesting. How do you like, for most of us, we can't really picture what's involved in putting a tiny microphone on a bat. Just in terms of the method, how do you go about doing that, and how do you get the information back? Does it sort of transmit, or do you have to get the bat again to retrieve it? How does that work?
So it's really depend on the species. Bats specifically are very easy to handle. Some of them are more difficult to catch, and other are more just easier. With this specific species, it's super easy to catch them. They're super gentle. You hold them in your hand, and you just take a bit of glue and you put it on the GPS with this microphone, and you hold it for a few minutes and you release the bat. So it's basically like in 10 minutes you can just have a bat with a GPS ready to release. Retrieving these microphones is a different story. In comparison to GPS technologies that you can get the information even in real time, like we did in this study, retrieving like acoustic data is very heavy. You cannot just transfer it. It can be gigas of information just after a few hours of recording, especially bats. If you imagine the frequency of the recordings, you need to record in a 100 kilohertz or 200 kilohertz. It creates a very large data set within these tiny microphones. So you need to find it, which means that you need to try to understand or guess or have something to help you to understand where the bats flew, because the GPS in this case will just fall off a few days later. So that's really a lot of effort to understand where it fell. It could be in the foraging site of the bat. It could be in another cave, because these species are switching between roosts. So it's not necessarily where we caught it.
Wow.
And I think that's the most difficult part when you use this kind of technology, but it's really worth it, because when you get this kind of information back, you just have like endless amount of information about their behavior. So it's really make a difference.
It sounds a little bit like a treasure hunt, and you must be somewhat used to or getting experience in caving or going into caves. Is that part of the research then?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's exactly like, you described it really good. It's really part of what we do. Yeah.
What would you say to people who sort of maybe have never met a bat, but think that bats might be scary or creepy? I know a lot of people have that stereotype about them. And what would you tell them about bats that may or may not sort of challenge that perception?
I think bats are, beside the fact that they are super smart animals, like we all have experience in rescue bats that were injured or like not part of the experiment, just like we get some people that call us, we found an injured bat, and then you need to really get to know it, right? When it's basically like to raise a cat for a few days. And it is very similar to any other pet. In terms of the personality of the different bats, it's basically a very cute animal. It's the most soft creatures that you can imagine. They're very gentle. They love each other. They take care of each other amazingly. You see it also in the wild. You can see the mother and pup behavior. They really teach, like the pups really learn from the mothers how to navigate. We can see how they nurse their pups for so long period after they finish the lactation period. It means that there is this very strong relationship between a mother and a pup. I know that they have a very bad reputation, but except for how smart bats are, and we just realize there's so many different aspects of their cognitive abilities just in the, I think, last decades. But I don't know, for me, I'm really amazed by the diversity that they represent. The stories, of course, and their bad reputation are not really justified by any true, like, it's not really There is not a real reason. I will say that they're super cute. I love them personally, but I also do not just go into a cave for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to remember that we also need to protect them and to try to avoid their natural environment.
Like they're a lot sort of sweeter and more complex and gentle than people expect, but they're also sensitive, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. You talked about their intelligence, and I saw in one of your papers how they use, I think you called it acoustic cognitive mapping to sort of navigate on bigger scales than people had realized. Could you talk a little bit about what acoustic cognitive map-based navigation is? That was a mouthful, but how they kind
Yeah.
of navigate on this wider scale.
Yeah, so we found, I will start with a different paper and then I will proceed with this one. So we found a few years ago that fruit bats can use visual cognitive map-based navigation. It basically means that they have kind of mental representation of their environment. And practically, it means that if they fly, bats fly really far to a specific location. For example, fruit bats can fly 30 kilometers a night to a specific trees that they prefer to feed on.
Wow.
So that will be tree A. Okay. On another night, they can feed to a different trees that they also prefer and they will return to day after day. The fact that they have cognitive map means that they can create a shortcut between these two locations and just fly in a straight line between them. We do it all the time. We just take a shortcut between work and the supermarket. It makes sense to us. We don't really need to think about it like too much, right? We just know that we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically means that bats can do the same thing. In the case of fruit bats, we see that they do it using vision like we do.
Mm-hmm.
But in case of the insectivore bats that we studied in the other study, what we realized that they can do it while using echolocation alone. It means that just by using this echolocation, which is to us seems to be a much more difficult task than to use vision, they also able to identify their location. If I take a bat and I release him in an unknown location, after it will scan the environment using echolocation alone, it can identify the landmarks. For example, it can identify that there are trees, and then there is a swamp, and then there is a road, and it can just after a few minutes, it just fly, understand where it is using its echolocation and just change its flight direction and directly fly back to its destination.
Wow.
So in this specific study, it was actually the first time that we were able to show that bats can use echolocation for large scale navigation. Until then, we didn't know that they can do it. We just knew that they can use it for catching insects and for orientation in a very small scale. So we were really excited to show that they can use echolocation for really large scale navigation, and really surprised to see that they have this cognitive map ability. It's considered to be the most sophisticated navigation strategy. It was
really
it was a surprise
fascinating.
to us.
They must be really sensitive to sort of tiny signals coming back. I'm picturing like sound waves going really long distances and bouncing back. They must be picking up very complex and sensitive signals there.
Yes, but you need to remember that echolocation has a very limited sensing range in comparison to vision. And that's make it even more complicated. So you can, if a bat is looking to recognize a very large object like a mountain, it can identify it up to tens of meters using echolocation and 2 kilometers using vision. So you must be able to really know your environment in order to use this cognitive map-based navigation if you don't have vision.
That is really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about the link, if there is one? I think I saw a writing where maybe you mentioned this, that there's a link between bat populations and how they're doing and the amount of pesticides or chemicals people need to use in the environment. We've been talking in our town here about pesticides and their impact on the environment or people and pets' health. And I was wondering if this question makes sense, if you could speak about the link between bat health and bat populations with our need to use chemicals.
Yes, so unfortunately, it's a very, I think it's a very hot topic now. And I think one of the places that you really see the impact is in the US, where we had this pathogen that really decreased many species of bats during the last decade. And over there was a paper that was published recently that shows that there is a very strong correlation between the decrease of bat population and the increase of the use of pesticides, and which lead to increase of mortality in human infants.
Wow.
So there is a direct influence of the bat population on the pesticides use. That's clear. We also need to remember that bats do not only responsible for eating insects, right? They are also responsible. There are. This is one of the ecological contributions that they have is pollination and also seed dispersal. So it's gonna impact the human society in other ways as well. We already see it in the agave in Mexico, that when they do not let the bats to pollinate and the flowers, naturally, the plants are being, they are suffer from diseases, and that's a huge problem for the industry in Mexico. And it will, we will see it later when the situation become worse. You really see the impact. But in the US, I think it's a very good example, but a sad situation. Yes, that you already see it on the human society.
So it sounds like we're learning that bats are not only less scary than their stereotype, but they're also pretty important to our health and our industries and our food. And on that note, for my last question, it's a bit of a big one, but bats, I know they're facing challenges from climate change and urbanization. And then in the US, like you said, there's been really devastating pathogens. Um, how how are they doing? What can people do if they want to help bats? I know you already mentioned maybe staying away, giving them space. Are there other things that people who care about this can do to help?
I think this is the really most important part. Try to let them have their home, which is their roost, as a safe place for them. It's like someone intruding into your house. You can be that will really affect the current moment and the next day and maybe the next generation for them. So I think that's the most important part, to stay away, to let them have their own space. Usually we do not really feel any interference of bats toward our daily life, and we should do the same. We should let them live their life. Really, as a community, we need to make sure that we reserve their foraging sites. But as individuals, we can contribute by just stay away from the roosts. I think it's super important.
Well, thank you so much, both for this fascinating research you do and what you're learning about bats, but also for sharing your perspective and knowledge about them and experience with them. I've learned a ton about bats, and I can't wait to share this with the listeners. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really waiting to hear your podcasts.
Like a bat out of hell, I'll be gone when the morning comes. But when the night is over, like a bat out of hell, I'll be gone, gone, gone. But like a bat out of hell, I'll be gone when the morning comes. But when the day is done and the sun goes down and the moonlight shining through, like a sinner before the gates of heaven, I'll come crawling home.
It was really fascinating talking with Dr. Aya Goldschtein, and I wish her the best in her research of bats and in her being an ambassador for what we should know about bats, both in terms of how important they are and how they really aren't as scary as some of the literature and movies out there would have us believe. Now we'll learn from a study that Dr. Goldschtein was one of the authors on, and this study is called A Social Foraging Trade-Off in Echolocating Bats Reveals that they benefit from some conspecifics but are impaired when many are around. Conspecifics are just individual animals of the same species, so just some other fellow bats of the same kind. This article talks about how social foraging is really important for a lot of different species, and in an episode on ravens, we also learn that social foraging is very complex in that species as well. In this study, the authors used tiny microphones to look at both the benefits and costs of social foraging for some small bat species. And in talking with the researcher today, we did learn about how they glue these teeny tiny microphones and then go look for them when they fall off, which is really incredible. The authors found that there's kind of a Goldilocks zone, or a perfect number of other bats to be around in terms of their success at foraging or finding food. A few other ones around is helpful. Being on your own was not helpful, and also having too many around was less helpful. So they were most successful finding food when there were just sort of a medium amount of other bats around, and they go a little bit more into that in the article. But I think it's really cool how these tiny microphones are being used to answer different questions about bats that maybe couldn't be answered before this technology and capability came about.
I'm back and I'm flapping free. Let me tell you a story, and it's all about... Yo, the name is Patty. The logic is erratic. Potato in a jacket. Toys in the attic. I rock and I ramble. My brain is scrambled. Wrapped like an animal, but I'm a mammal. All of our cosmetics are non...
To conclude, we're going to hear a poem called Bats by Luke Hathaway. And like I said at the beginning, if you find a poem that really highlights the sort of soft or kind nature of bats, I'd love to hear from you, because it would be fun to feature that in this show. Bats by Luke Hathaway. They billow from a hillside in Cha'am. Together they are more than plural. The planet's darkest song, a tongue, a serpent muscling air apart, a dire banner come unfurled, a river flowing wholly from the old mute mountain's desperate heart, the last confession of the world. Conceive of each one singly, if you can. With that, we'll conclude the episode about bats, but I wanted to say thank you again to the researcher for speaking with us today and highlighting the sort of warmer, gentler side of bats, as well as some of the cutting-edge research that's going on about them. Best of luck to Dr. Aya Goldschtein in her future studies, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks for the next episode of Biologica. And in the meantime, keep discovering.
Hi, said the little leather-winged bat, I'll tell you the reason that I fly in the night is because I lost my heart's delight. Howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, howdy-dowdy diddle-o-day, oh-lo-lee-diddle-o-do.